descent, nor of human decision or a husband's will, but born of God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. We've seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. John testified concerning him, and he cried out, saying, "This is the one I spoke about when I said, 'He who comes after me has surpassed me because he was before me.' Out of his fullness we have all received grace in place of grace already given. For the law was given through Moses, grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God but the one and only Son, who is himself God and is in the closest relationship with the Father, has made him known."
Well, you might know, I suspect you do, that this is the time of year when the shelves, at least in WH Smith's, are filled up with various attempts to take our money and the money that floats around at this time of year, particularly through biographies or autobiographies. I was in there this week, and just on I think the top 10 or something, there's one sadly from the late Matthew Perry, Britney, Barbara Streisand, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Peter Kay, Dawn French, Patrick Stewart, even Cliff Richard. Who thought he was still alive? But there you go. He's still got something to say. The list goes on. All the attempts to tell their story, their unvarnished truth. There's been one so-called biography called Endgame, which you may have come across, which wants to tell the true story of Meghan and Harry. And you might know it's hit controversy, particularly in the last couple of weeks, because accidentally, in a Dutch version of the book, they published the names of two high-level royals, and it caused an explosion online. Of course, apparently it was accident, it wasn't on purpose. The sales that came from it, probably will all go to charity, no doubt. But there was a deliberate attempt, it seems, for the book to get noticed. People want their books read. They want their truth. Well, as we come to John's eyewitness biography of his best friend, Jesus, in these opening verses, he does the equivalent of wanting to cause a cultural explosion. Because with his opening sentence, well, he would have set the world on fire in the first century. Look down at that first sentence. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Verse 14, that Word became flesh and made his dwelling amongst us, or tabernacled, set up his home amongst us. Those are jaw-dropping words. They might be familiar words to us, maybe too familiar. But when they were first penned, when they were first read, when they were first proclaimed 2,000 years ago, they were jaw-dropping because the claim was that God himself had entered our humanity. John writes because he wants us to encounter God. He wants us to encounter God. You'll know, perhaps you do, that there are more famous words than John chapter 1, and that's the first sentences of the Bible itself, where it says, "In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth." And John's deliberately picking up that sentence, isn't he? Those are the opening words of the Old Testament scriptures. In the beginning, God created. Those were political words penned by Moses, words that were designed to encourage God's people who first read them that Yahweh, their God, was the one true Lord. In comparison to all the gods of Mesopotamia around who worshipped sun, moon, and stars, who were told that they formed the world out of chaos and violence, Moses writes and said, no, in the beginning, God created. Out of nothing, he spoke the universe into being. The Lord who rescued his people out of Egypt, who has made them his own people, is the God who created everything. You don't need to be afraid of the other gods. Those idols are nothing because Yahweh made everything. In fact, one of perhaps the most sarcastic throwaway line in those opening verses of Genesis, Moses says of the stars that were worshipped that the Lord, well, he also made the stars. Those were powerful words designed to comfort Israel, to give them hope and courage as a small nation clinging to God's promises. But then John, who'd spent 3 years with Jesus, become probably one of his closest friends, the one that Jesus loved, he says, writes this about his friend, echoing those words of Genesis. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. My best friend, Jesus of Nazareth, the son of Mary and Joseph, was there at the beginning of everything. The word God spoke when he spoke, let there be light, was this word who's become flesh and dwelt amongst us. John says, before there were protons and planets, it wasn't a singular force or power that made everything. It wasn't even eternal matter floating around waiting for a spark. No, there was nothing physical, but there was this community of persons, this Word who was God and was with God. John says that's the Jesus that I've known, that I've met, that I've spent time with. That's the one who became flesh. See, John wants us to encounter God as we meet his friend Jesus. It's why he penned these words. Turn with me to John 20. Andy read these earlier. It's good for us to get our noses in them, though. So turn to page 1089 and John chapter 20. And this is it's the end of John's biography of his friend Jesus. And he tells the story in John 20 from 24 onwards of Thomas, of Jesus appearing to Thomas. Jesus has already appeared to the disciples. They've seen him, they've met him, they've been overjoyed. But Thomas wasn't with them. And Thomas, being a true skeptic, says, look, unless I see it for myself, I'm not going to believe you. And then this happens in sentence 26 on page 1089. A week later, his disciples were in the house again, and Thomas was with them. Though the doors were locked, Jesus came and stood among them and said, "Peace be with you." Then he said to Thomas, "Put your finger here, see my hands. Reach out your hand and put it into my side. Stop doubting and believe." Thomas said to him, "My Lord and my God." Then Jesus told him, "Because you have seen me, you have believed. Blessed are those who have not seen and yet have believed." A remarkable encounter. Thomas encounters my Lord and my God. His heart and his life is reorientated around Jesus. But Jesus says something really remarkable there. Did you notice it? Thomas is blessed because he's had opportunity to witness Jesus. But Jesus says of those that don't have Thomas's opportunity are more blessed to put their trust in Jesus, to have more of an encounter of God. How does that encounter happen? It's all right, Lorna, it's done. How does that encounter happen? Jesus performed many other signs, verse 30, in the presence of his disciples, which are not recorded in this book. But these are written that you may believe that Jesus is the Messiah, the Son of God, and that by believing you may have life in his name. That's how the encounter happens. It's how to be more blessed than even Thomas, is that through the words that John pens, the promise is that we encounter the risen Jesus. I don't know if you've been, perhaps not, but if you've been keeping up to date with the COVID inquiry, You'll have seen over the last few weeks and months that various witnesses have been interviewed, documents reviewed, in order to try to work out exactly what has happened. And John's Gospel is a bit like, it's like a courtroom, if you read all the way through. John, I don't know how many times he says this, but he describes people's testimony. It's always about testimony. And it's almost like John has set up his own courtroom as a sort of a setting for his biography about Jesus. And he keeps pulling in the various people to share their testimonies of their encounter with Jesus. So we get Nicodemus and the woman at the well and the blind man and Lazarus and all the rest of it. All these different witnesses pulled in to give the testimony that Jesus is the Lord. That's how we're to encounter God, by spending time in these words and meeting Jesus here. That'd be a great prayer for us, wouldn't it, for this Christmas time? Not just for us, but our friends and those that we might invite to come along to the various things that we're putting on. Not that the room would be full, not even that we might get opportunity to say something, though we'd pray for that, but that people would encounter the living God. Because that's what's on offer as we speak these words about Jesus to people. That's what Jesus promised, more blessed. That's why John wrote his gospel, that you might believe, that you might have life in his name. Your friends can have a Thomas moment this Christmas, just by hearing these words about Jesus. Their whole lives can be reorientated around the God who made them. Because that's who he is. Look down, turn back to John chapter 1, page 1063, John chapter 1, and look at sentence number 3. Having described the Word who is with God and was God, verse 3, through him all things were made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. John says, my friend, the one who's become flesh, he shapes and defines everything. Everything bears the imprint of Jesus. Everything operates according to his character and his personality. This is a world made by Jesus, shaped by Jesus, held together by Jesus, explained by Jesus. So whatever you're up to next week, whether you're designing tunnels or helping people in a hospital ward, teaching kids at school, supporting people who are struggling, whether you're changing nappies or playing with Jupo or just cleaning the house, whatever you're up to, Jesus has everything to do with that. Because he made it all. It was made through him and by him and through him. In him is life, says John. Everything revolves around Jesus. And it revolves around him not because you decide it should, but because it belongs to him. It already does. See, this life is all about Jesus. It's all about him. And it also means that every soul in the Rylands, every person, every house occupied by people, they also belong to him. Your kids belong to him. Your colleagues belong to him. Your wider family belong to him. It's all his. He made them. See, Thomas was having a difficult time. I suspect it was a really tough time for him. All his friends claiming that they'd had this encounter with Jesus, and him like, come on, I've just watched him crucified and buried. What do you mean you've had an encounter? No doubt he felt on the edge, excluded perhaps. And graciously, Jesus says, Thomas, it's me. But then remarkably says to each one of you and me, we can be more blessed than Thomas. I guess the obvious question for us at the start of our sort of Christmassy things, whether it's as a church or as in your own homes, is how much of your Christmas plans so far have been occupied with making much of Jesus? I found that a rebuking question to ask of myself. At the time of year when life is as full as it possibly could be, it's quite hard to make space for Jesus, isn't it? Too busy for a quiet time this week, Jesus. Can't manage 15 minutes with you this morning. I've got things to plan and things to do. But the deep irony is that as those of us in the West fill our lives and stomachs with the things he's created at Christmas, chasing the experiences and the pleasures and the wonderful things that are really good that he's given to us. The irony, the deep irony is as we enjoy the good things he gives, we miss him. We push him away. When an encounter with him is on offer, a more blessed encounter than Thomas, a real spiritual experience, a deep encounter with the God of the universe. Life in all its fullness, John says later in his gospel. That's what's on offer this Christmas, an encounter with God. But secondly, there's also an opportunity to encounter family. We talked a bit about this last week when we did our Beatitudes service. And we thought about what you would say if someone said to you, well, what's God like? Well, I wonder if you have think about your friends, the people that you know best, what they would say. If you ask them, well, what do you think God's like? What their response might be. What do you think they would say? I guess there'd be all sorts of answers to that. Some might say there just isn't one. Don't think there is a God. So it's a pointless question. Others might talk about a sense of maybe a power or a force that's out there, a higher power or something like that. Others might talk about fate. Perhaps a lot of people might talk about the sense of the divine within or something like that. But do you see what John says in this chapter? And here's a bit of it's confusing language, but ultimately he says, look, what's God like? He says God's family. Look at verse 1 again. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God. In other words, the Word is a distinct person, but who is also God, but also alongside God, shares God's very being. One translation puts it like this: the Word was continually with God. So, just to be clear, the Word wasn't the first being that was made, the first creature. God didn't create the Word and then create everything else, which some heresies and cults say, like Jehovah's Witnesses or Mormons. No, the Word was God and was with God, alongside God. I look down at verse 18. John sort of spells it out. He says, no one has ever seen God, but the one and only Son, who is himself God and is in the closest possible relationship with the Father, he has made him known. One old translation of the English translation of the Bible says, no one has ever seen God, but the one who is in the bosom of the Father has declared him. See, God, who is God? He's family. He's Father. Eternally the Father, loving the Son, who's always been the Son of the Father. So here's something that's really wonderful. I want us to really take hold of this if we can. Before the beginning of stuff, reality was the Father loving the Son in the fellowship of the Spirit. John talks about that in John chapter 14 onwards. Later talks about the Spirit. So who is God? Well, he's a family of persons, eternally loving each other. So before all the stuff that we can sense and touch and feel and look at and smell and taste, before all the stuff, more fundamental to life than stuff is relationship. And it's why instinctively, as human beings, we all think that relationship and love and family and community and friendship is more fundamental, is more important than stones and wood and rocks. And here's why. Because the God who was there in the beginning, is relationship. God is love. That's what that word that means. See how wonderful that is? What good news that is. There are various stories that people tell about our universe and how we came to be. Option one, is that, well, the universe has always existed. It's just been here forever. But most people don't think that's true. It seems lots of evidence that it started at some point. And so there's option two, which is particularly popular at the minute, that there was nothing, and then there was this resurrection miracle at the beginning, and out of nothing came stuff. Inanimate stuff like gases and atoms just popped into being and collided with each other. And they collided in such a precise way that the conditions were set for DNA to form in the first cell, all by accident. And remarkably, alongside that random processes of DNA forming was a mechanism called RNA, which would be able to read DNA in order that life might blindly progress into the world that we see now with people who love each other. It's a bit silly, isn't it? Really? But that is option two. Or option three, in the beginning was the Word. And the Word was with God, and the Word was God, and through him all things were made. Out of the life of God, God creates everything, and people made in his image who would love like him and know him. And that's why knowing him and meeting Jesus and orientating your life around Jesus is life in all its fullness. See, your sense that community is really important, that loneliness is bad and that selfishness is ugly, that abuse is wrong and should be called out, is exactly right, because ultimate reality is a God who is community, who is love moving out towards others. It's why when you see the news and you see families torn apart by war and communities devastated by violence, you get angry. It's why death is so painful. It's why we love love. Why every culture sings about it, delights in it. It's why all the songs in the charts are about it. Because that's fundamental to all of reality. You were made to be loved by God, who is love. You were created to enjoy him and to know him and to be welcomed into his family, the family of the Father, Son, and Spirit, to be kind of swallowed up in their affection. That's the encounter you can have as you come to Jesus. Life is in him. And it's why your Christmas will be miserable if you avoid him this Christmas. If you push him away, when you turn away from him and other people and chase the pleasures of entertainment or food or success or whatever it is, when you feel dry and alone and distant, and you keep pushing Jesus away and say, I'm not coming to you, anything but you. And I know that feeling. I know it all too well. I know, you need him, but it's still the pizza, isn't it? Or whatever it is for you. And he's like, come to me and have fullness. Know me. Encounter me. That's why I'm here. To be swallowed up into the family of the Father, Son, and Spirit. See, to encounter God, to encounter family, and to enjoy a welcome. Let's just see that in verse 18 particularly. Look down at that with me. No one has ever seen God, but the one and only Son, who is himself God and is in the closest relationship with the Father, has made him known. That phrase, John wants to really convey that Jesus is in the bosom of the Father. There's nowhere closer. No one is closer to the Father than the Son. But that wonderful last four words, he has made him known, is not just a knowledge of have a look, but come in. You can be in this life with me. The only begotten Son who's in the bosom of the Father has come that we might be welcomed into that life. That's why he came in the flesh, verse 14. Look down at that. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling amongst us. He's tabernacled with us. God has come close to us in the person of Jesus so that we can be in relationship with him. See, if you're feeling distant from God this morning, if you're dry in your walk with him, you sense that he's far away, maybe uninterested in you. Well, John says to people like that, will you just come back to Jesus? Come and look at him again. Come and behold him again. And I don't mean sort of work up an experience, feel better, get on with it. I mean, come and find him where he is. Where's this more blessed encounter than Thomas? It's in these words. It's time in these words with him. Learning about him. Just use John's Gospel over Christmas. Read through it. Read through it 100 times. Keep reading it. Encounter the God who's made himself known in his Son that you meet in these words. See, the creator of everything has anchored himself to our world. And the place that we find him now is in his word. Turn with me, last time we'll do this, but turn to John chapter 17 and verse 23. Just to underline the point. Now, this is Jesus' prayer before he goes to his death. And John records it for us. And look down he's prayed for his disciples, so for the apostles particularly. And then he prays for us. Look down at verse 20. My prayer is not for them alone. I pray also for those who will believe in me through their message, that all of them may be one, Father, just as you are in me and I am in you. May they also be in us, so that the world may believe that you sent me. Just let Jesus' prayer for you, because it's a prayer for you. It's very clear in verse 20. It's for those who will believe in him through the message of the apostles, which is you, if you're a Christian this morning. Here's what Jesus has prayed. That you might be in him and the Father and know them just as they know each other. That's the encounter. that we can have through believing in the message of the apostles. Now, that's remarkable. That's what's on offer. So however you're feeling this morning, this is reality. That as you trust in Jesus, you're welcomed into the family of the Father, Son, and Spirit forever. So when you come to him this morning, stop keeping him at arm's length. Stop pretending that life's too busy to spend time in his word with him. It's not. It's really not. There are 1,000 things you can stop doing, so you've got time for him. And enjoy Jesus' promise that it is more blessed than Thomas, for you and me to meet Jesus in his word this Christmas. Let's bow our heads and pray before we sing. If the band wants to come up, that'd be great.